News breaking in the last hour. Violent rhetoric directed at former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney by Donald Trump is now being investigated by Arizona law enforcement as a possible death threat. Here's how Vice President Kamala Harris responded to Donald Trump's remark that Liz Cheney should face, quote, rifles in her face.
He has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party. I have also thought a lot about what this means in terms of our standing in the world. As Vice President, I have represented the United States of America around the world. And what I know is that when we walk in those rooms representing the United States of America, we have the earned and self-appointed authority to then talk about the importance of democracy, the importance of rule of law. And as a result, people around the world who are fighting for freedom and opportunity hold us up as a model. America deserves better than what Donald Trump is offering.
All of this bringing us back, of course, to the choice facing we the people, the voters, in 4 days. We have heard now from the generals who served under Donald Trump, men like General Jim Mattis, General Mark Milley, General John Kelly. We have heard from former White House officials, aides like Olivia Troy, Miles Taylor, Sarah Matthews, Anthony Scaramucci. We have heard from Kevin Carroll, who told us on our air about his 5-year-old son who knelt and prayed at the grave of General Kelly's son to comfort him while Donald Trump sped away from Arlington National Cemetery after casually calling our veterans, quote, suckers and losers. We have heard from national security and intelligence chiefs, people who briefed Donald Trump inside the Oval Office. People like Sue Gordon, who warned us on our air yesterday that Donald Trump will make our nation less safe and alienate us from our intelligence allies all around the world. And now that Trump's rhetoric has veered into such dangerous territory that it is right now currently under investigation, I feel compelled to share the question I get asked more than any other when I'm off this set, which is this: where is George W. Bush? I understand better than most that these days he chooses to speak through his actions, through the incredible work of his library, to his daily dedication to democracy and honoring our country's wounded veterans. But these are the comments we're talking about right now in the United States of America from someone running to hold the job he had, to be our president. He said this about a critic and supporter of his opponent.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person.
So this morning, I re-upped my question to President Bush's office about whether anything might change his mind about staying silent ahead of the election next week. An advisor said he's not going to insert himself into this political moment, but in light of the violent nature of the threat toward his former vice president's daughter during the time she served him, and as a dad whose own daughter just last week bravely entered the political fray campaigning for Kamala Harris, I thought today it was important to share some of George W. Bush's past statements about what America does and what Americans do when they face threats.
Every milestone of liberty was considered impossible before it was achieved. In our time, we must decide our own belief. Either freedom is the privilege of an elite few, or it is the right and capacity of all humanity. There is a line in our time, and in every time, between those who believe that all men are created equal and those who believe that some men and women and children are expendable in the pursuit of power. There is a line in our time, and in every time, between the defenders of human liberty and those who seek to master the minds and souls of others. Our generation has now heard history's call, and we will answer it.
And on the work of his post-presidency, which is beautiful, honoring the men and women who have been wounded in the line of duty. Here's George W. Bush talking about that on the Today Show.
Our country is blessed to have people who are willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves.
At a young age, I realized how lucky we were to live here, and I just wanted to give back.
I wanted to draw attention not only to their courage, but to the fact that they've contributed once and they need to know they can contribute again. People ask me, do you miss being president? The answer is not really. But I miss saluting people who volunteered to wear the uniform, and all 4 of them did. How can we help these great Americans transition from the military to civilian life? They've got visible wounds, they've got invisible wounds. But all 4 of these vets are willing to stand up and say, I had an issue and I want to help somebody else.
He misses saluting the men and women of our military. Here's how General John Kelly describes a vote for Donald Trump when it comes to those men and women, how Trump views those men and women, the men and women George W. Bush lovingly paints and seeks to honor every day.
But he basically said to you that those who died for America on the battlefield were losers and suckers, and he said it more than once.
Yes, but he would say it would always, something else would get him going off at times. Again, McCain, he talked about, and it was like almost a recording, but the point is anyways, he would say it at times, sometimes unexpectedly, but he never could wrap his arms around why people would serve the country in uniform. What was in it for them? I think he just could never wrap his arms around why people would do things selflessly. What's in it for them? I think that's a much more powerful, but that's just me.
So today, we have a right to hope that those who have stood for freedom and celebrated those who have protected it might have a last-minute change of heart in the closing hours of this campaign. And because I once had the job of trying to convince President George W. Bush to sometimes do things he didn't want to do, I say this. On Election Day in 2004, while Air Force One sat parked on a tarmac because we decided we needed to beam into a half a dozen local television interviews in battleground states to help get out the vote, George W. Bush turned to me and the other communications staffers and said this, quote, "Whatever happens, Nicole, at least we will know we left everything on the field." I make this public plea to President George W. Bush in the spirit of doing what he taught me to do, leave everything I know how to do in service of our democracy and freedoms, the things he taught us to cherish, on the field.
Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay?
Just past 2 a.m. Eastern on election night in 2020, Donald Trump falsely claimed victory and called for the vote counting to stop. The reality was that the result of the election was still unclear. News networks didn't start calling the race for Biden for another 4 days. Now, Trump's false claim of victory was temporarily boosted by what was called the red mirage. Same-day votes, which were counted first, tilted towards Trump. But because of the pandemic, a record number of Americans voted by mail, and those votes, which took days to count, gave Biden the White House. So, what should we expect this year, and when should we expect it? Joining me now is MSNBC national political correspondent, the great Steve Kornacki. Steve, it is so good to have you here tonight. I am so thrilled to get an early preview of what you're thinking. Can we first talk about the state of Pennsylvania? I was camped out in front of City Hall for more days than I care to remember. Do you have any expectation that their ability to count votes and return a call will be any faster this year than it was in 2020?
Famous last words, but I would say we can be cautiously optimistic about the speed of the count in Pennsylvania and really in most, if not all, of these battleground states. Why in Pennsylvania? Well, a lot of people will say, and this is true, they didn't change any of the laws in Pennsylvania. They had a chance to that would have expedited this. That didn't happen. But what has happened is this. We've seen it in Pennsylvania and we've seen it elsewhere. Voting by mail is down from 2020. During the pandemic, a lot more people were using it. They were at home. They didn't want to go out. And mail is what really clogged it in Pennsylvania and all these other states, especially in Pennsylvania, because they'd never processed it before. So now at least they have a few elections, election officials do, of dealing with mail-in voting. They're not going to have the massive numbers of it that they had before. They'll have plenty of it, but they're not going to have the massive numbers. And I think as well some indications that some of these counties, they didn't count overnight last time. I think you're going to get more sort of round-the-clock counting as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, even for Pennsylvania, to be faster.
Can we talk about what triggers recounts in some of these key battleground states? Because I know in Arizona and Pennsylvania, if the margin's tight enough, it's an automatic recount. What does it look like more holistically across the 7 key states?
I guess the most important thing to know is that in all of them, there's some kind of provision that any candidate can have a recount if they want it. They may have to pay for it in some cases, but there are provisions for the recount to take place. In Pennsylvania, there's an automatic one if it's 0.5%, 0.5% statewide. In Michigan, it's automatic, but it's stringent. That's a 2, by the way. 2,000 votes or fewer. Now, it was when Trump won Michigan in 2016, the margin was about 11,000, so it was starting to get down into that range. It was up to 154,000 last time, but you've got automatic recounts there. And a lot of the others, though, it's sort of, if it's very close and a candidate wants it, they can have it. May cost them money, but they can do it.
Steve, what, with that in mind, what are the counties that you're most sort of eagerly watching on election night that are going to be, if we can call them that, bellwethers for the ultimate result?
Oh, so many. What a question.
Give me your top 3. Give me your top 3.
Top 3. We got 3,143.
I know. It's like asking, Willy Wonka to pick a favorite piece of candy. I don't know.
What do we want to look at? I'll give you a couple we're going to look at right here. Let's go to Georgia, and we're going to pull up the 2020 results. And I call this the blue blob. You've got 9 core Democratic counties in the immediate Atlanta metro area. These have been getting much, much bluer election to election. Democrat, more than 40% of the votes inside here. One of my key questions here, this is if Democrats are having a good night, is the blob getting any bigger? And if it's going to get bigger, it's going to happen in this county right here. This is Fayette County. You can see Joe Biden lost this by 7 points, but just take a look at what's been happening in Fayette County. Look at this. Mitt Romney won this 2-1 in 2012, came all the way down to 19 points in 16, down to 7. If this trend continues, if Fayette flips and that blob gets bigger, it's a sign Democrats are getting something they want out of Georgia. So I'll give you that as number 1. Let's take a look up in North Carolina, too, because that's going to be a 7:30 poll close. We should get early stuff. How about there's Charlotte? It's a big city, one of the 2 big population hubs. Let's go to the east of Charlotte, the bedroom communities of Union County, big suburban county. Now, this is a little different than Fayette I just showed you because it's still an overwhelmingly Republican suburb, but it's a little more subtle here. But take a look in 2016, Trump won this by just over 30 points, came down to 24. An important question for Trump. Remember, he won Carolina both times, but his margin was cut more than in half. This was a significant part of the reason why. Does he stop this drainage or does it get worse? Does he claw back towards 2016 or does he regress further? I think that's key because there's a lot of counties like Union around North Carolina. You talked about Pennsylvania, so we'll close out on a 3rd county in Pennsylvania. And I want to go with, it's not that original, but Lackawanna County. This is Scranton. This is where Joe Biden's from. But again, just take a look at the political journey that Lackawanna County's been on. And so many counties in these Big 10 states are like this. Obama won Lackawanna in a landslide, 28 points. Look what happened in 2016. Trump got all the way down to 3.5 points. Biden, the Scranton native, comes along and gets that back up to the high high single digits. I want to know, is this going back towards 2016? Is Trump actually flipping Lackawanna County? That's what his folks want to do, flip this and win this. Or are the gains that Democrats made small relative to what they used to have? But if they're back at mid-high single-digit Democratic victory here, it's a huge thing for Democrats.
Steve, you're such a wizard, man. I mean, I got to say, you just, for a brief moment, my anxiety and stress turned to excitement. I cannot wait to see you back at that big board on Tuesday night. You are a national treasure. Thank you for giving us an early preview. Our own Steve Kornacki. See you on Tuesday, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Really nice of you.
Well, folks, here we are. It is the Friday before Election Day, just 4 days to go. We don't have a show on Monday, so last time I'm going to be talking to you on this show on All In. I will, of course, be there Sunday night for our special. I'll be there Tuesday night as well. I imagine you have a lot of feelings in your body. You're feeling anxious at some level. I am too. We don't know what will happen on Tuesday, genuinely. And the thing that is anxiety producing is that none of us individually has any control. The outcome of this election will be determined by the aggregated decisions of 150 million of our fellow citizens. And that's really nerve-wracking. Honestly, it can be sort of terrifying, but it's also the whole point of democracy. The old saying goes that it's the worst system of government except for all the others that have been tried. And during the Trump years, there have certainly been times when I didn't know what to think or feel about a lot of the people with whom I share this country and who they want to lead it. But voting alongside them is still better than any other option. I mean, it's better than just letting Donald Trump decide, and it's better than letting someone I like decide. The whole point is that no one person, no individual chooses our leader and chooses what we all do together. Even the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, can't unilaterally control the outcome Tuesday night. And he is trying. $118 million. And it's corrupt and insane that he can under our current campaign finance regime. But he's desperate to effect an outcome that he cannot unilaterally control when he could unilaterally control just about everything else in his life. The genius at the core of our democratic undertaking is that we all decide together for better or worse. That's true at the ballot box, and it's also true after the winner is announced. If Kamala Harris wins on Tuesday, a lot of us are going to be breathing an enormous sigh of relief. A lot of people are going to be celebrating. But even if that happens, it will still be the case that slightly less than 50% of our fellow citizens voted for a man who is just dangerous and manifestly unfit for the job and attempted to overthrow the republic. And that's not going to go away. And we're going to have to reconcile with those millions of Americans through democratic means, persuasion and organizing and civil society and discourse. In short, the work of democratic politics. Now, the worst case scenario may also happen. Donald Trump may win, and he may win outright, fair and square. Because sometimes majorities do collectively make really bad decisions. It happens. But I really want to be clear about this, about what happens on the other side of that mountain if I'm here at that desk talking to you in that eventuality. That will not be the end of the story, not at all. If Donald Trump wins the White House and returns to be president, he will absolutely try to do a lot of terrible, cruel, and dangerous things. There is no doubt about that. But it is just not a foregone conclusion he will succeed in them. Last time he failed to execute a lot of his bad ideas. And yes, as we have warned on this program time and time again, there are going to be fewer guardrails this time. It will 100% be more dangerous than the last time. But as Lawfare editor-in-chief Benjamin Wittes put it back in 2017, Donald Trump's malevolence is tempered by his incompetence. And there's no reason to believe that Trump and the people around him will all of a sudden become super competent if they step back in the Oval Office. And I have to stress that the other democratic mechanisms we have to protect ourselves and protect American democracy still exist. Civil society does not dissolve in an instant because someone wins an election, even a wannabe authoritarian. Public opinion doesn't go away. Persuasion to our neighbors and fellow citizens, the independent media, and the rights they have, we're still here. Fundamentally, to my core, I do not believe America is a fascist country. I do not believe we want authoritarianism. I know a lot of us totally understandably and rationally view the outcome of this election as a referendum on that idea, but I think that most of the people voting for Donald Trump don't see it in those terms, honestly. I still think, no matter the outcome, the broad majority of this country wants democratic self-rule, and that majority that wants democratic self-rule will still exist after Tuesday, after the winner is called, no matter who wins. If it is Donald Trump, all of us in that pro-democracy majority will have to work together to thwart his worst impulses. Because in the end, all we have in a democratic republic is each other. Sometimes that can be really scary, even panic-inducing. But it's what we have, and it's better than anything else.
To elect Donald Trump would also be to choose the weirdos in his orbit. And that will be a nightmare scenario for America, but especially for American women. Among the weird men encircling Trump, you have his would-be Vice President, J.D. Vance, who'd be one broken hip away from the presidency, sharing this extremist junk on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Have you seen all these studies that basically connect testosterone levels in young men with conservative politics?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe that's what's going on. The moment where I really started to get red-pilled on the whole vax thing was the sickest that I've been in the last 15 years by far was when I took the vaccine. Somehow it's fundamentally racist to say, well, we don't want certain people of certain backgrounds to be in the United States of America. No, it's just common sense.
Actually, James David, hating certain people of certain backgrounds is exactly what racism is. You then have Tucker Carlson, snake oil salesman of testicle tanning and God knows what else, claiming he was mauled by a demon while asleep, which left him bleeding in bed. A story endorsed by none other than Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist who is clearly not well, who was ordered to pay $1.5 billion, with a B, in damages for claiming the Sandy Hook school shooting was a hoax. There's also Stephen Miller, the ghoulish, sadistic grandson of Eastern European refugees, who seems to view rounding up brown immigrants, separating mothers from their children, and chucking them all into concentration camps as a sport he could actually letter in. But perhaps most alarming is that Donald Trump is promising to grant brain worm-infested animal carcass voyeur and dedicated anti-vaxxer Robert Kennedy Jr. unlimited power over women's health.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. we have. And he's going to work on health and women's health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on medicines. He can do anything he wants. He wants to look at the vaccines. He wants everything. I think it's great.
But what do you expect from a candidate who talks about women like this?
I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them.
Whether women like it or not, said the adjudicated sexual abuser. Joining me now is Grammy-nominated singer and actress Janelle Monáe. Ms. Monáe, it is so great to have you on the show. I would just love to get your top-of-mind thoughts about the men who claim they will now be our protectors. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and apparently Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who will be in charge of all of our health care.
Well, I want to say hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for holding us down and in the best possible way. It is very clear that the sexual abuser, the rapist, the dictator, and the misogynist, I can go on, that is Donald Trump, does not care about women and does not care about the health care for women and anybody else who he is talking about he wants to appoint to take care of women. They also do not care about women. This is so true about the Republicans and everybody that supports this man. It is very clear that he is the wrong candidate to be leading this country. He's only out for himself. He's not for our people, and he's playing to an audience that thrives off hate, division, and really the hatred of women. And I'm not going to stand here and allow it.
Amen. I mean, and the thing is what they're doing is a lot of when, people who take in a lot of conservative media see it. You're not necessarily going to see it if you're watching normal media, but they're couching a lot of their supposed protection of women in anti-trans hate and saying the thing that women should really worry about is not that they don't have access to abortion. We just had a teenager, an 18-year-old woman, ProPublica reported, died after 3 trips to the ER. She was clearly experiencing sepsis from a pregnancy in which the fetus was dead, and she's dead now because Texas wouldn't touch her. She's untouchable in Texas because of their abortion ban. But they're saying, oh, no, don't worry about dying because you don't have health care. Worry about trans people. That J.D. Vance interview with Joe Rogan, 3 hours, most of it was attacking trans people. They're saying that's how you protect women.
Yeah, it's clear that these people are out of their mind and they do not deserve to be in the White House and leading this country. We know that transphobic language is used as ammunition to murder and kill more trans people in this country. And I don't care if you are Democrat, Republican, Independent, what party you serve or you're supportive of, stand up for human rights. This is the language that literally kills humans. Taking control of women's bodies and waiting until they're on their deathbed before you can give them help, or having a doctor be so afraid to help a woman on her deathbed, that is absolutely heartbreaking to learn that Donald Trump wants that to be how we treat human beings. So I'm asking everyone to stand up for human rights. Don't even think about what party you are a part of. And right now, the only candidate in this race is Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Those are the only 2 candidates in this race who want to protect women's health care, reproductive rights, who want to protect trans rights, who want to protect the LGBTQIA+ rights. I'm queer. I'm non-binary. I'm black. I grew up to working class parents. My mom was a janitor. My daddy was a trash man. My stepdad, who's just like my dad, still works at the post office. Donald Trump cares about cutting taxes for billionaires. He don't care about my family. He don't care about poor people like my grandmother, who served in the county jail for 25 years. He doesn't care about my people. He doesn't care about marginalized folks. And so I'm asking those who are in the position of power, who benefit from whiteness, who benefit from patriarchy, to stand up for women, minorities, and those who don't have platforms to stand up for themselves. And do it with legislation. Vote up and down the ballot for people who will protect our rights, and vote for the candidates who will also be protecting our rights.
The kids out there watching their first presidential election should know that no presidential candidate in history has engaged in more personally insulting language and violent rhetoric than Donald Trump. No previous presidential candidate has ever made statements that left people wondering if he really wants to kill with a firing squad his political opponents, including a political opponent in his own party. But that's the way this presidential campaign is coming to an end, with the question of exactly who and how might Donald Trump want to execute if he becomes president? Who does he want to kill if he becomes president? Here's what Donald Trump said last night about former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney to former Fox buffoon Tucker Carlson, whose own text message revealed in court proceedings includes one about Donald Trump that says, "He's a demonic force, a destroyer. I hate him passionately." Those were Tucker Carlson's words about the person he pretends to be friends with now, Donald Trump. Let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person.
One more instructional point for the kids who are watching their first presidential election. No previous candidate has ever said she's a stupid person about one of their opponents. That's new language for presidential campaigning brought into it by Donald Trump and only Donald Trump. And obviously, no previous presidential candidate has ever publicly fantasized about one of his political opponents facing 9 guns shooting at her. Here is what Vice President Harris said about that this morning in Wisconsin.
He has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party. Trump is increasingly, however, someone who considers his political opponents the enemy, is permanently out for revenge, and is increasingly unstable and unhinged. His enemies list has grown longer, his rhetoric has grown more extreme, and he is even less focused than before on the needs and the concerns and the challenges facing the American people.
Unstable and unhinged. That's as far as Vice President Harris is willing to go rhetorically. It's also factual. There is no one who can claim that Donald Trump is not unstable. Notice that she did not say stupid. That is not presidential language or language for presidential candidates. I use the word stupid to describe Donald Trump, but I'm not running for president. And stupid is a fact with Donald Trump. He has proved that time and time again. The defenders of Trump spent the day insisting that he did not mean that he wanted to see Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad. But the one person who did not deny that Donald Trump wants to see Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad is Donald Trump. Donald Trump refused to deny his political opponent's interpretation about what he said about Liz Cheney last night. He simply let the accusation stand that he wants to have Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad. And today, he added this.
If you gave Liz Cheney a gun and put her into battle facing the other side with guns pointing at her, she wouldn't have the courage or the strength or the stamina to even look the enemy in the eye. She wouldn't have. She sits back in Washington. Oh, we ought to go and attack Iran, Iraq. We're going to attack everybody. That's why I broke up with her. All she wanted to do is go to war with everybody. Because she, like Kamala, is a stupid person.
Liz Cheney responded to Donald Trump this way. This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant. Women will not be silenced. Vote Kamala. And so Donald Trump is ending his campaign the way he began it and the way he lives every day of his life. A petty, vindictive, cruel, and unstable person. The latest Marist poll released today shows Kamala Harris at 50% of the vote in Pennsylvania to Donald Trump's 48%. And today, the Harris campaign released this ad in Pennsylvania.
This election, it's bigger than us. It's about the future. Do you want more chaos? Or like me, are you ready for some common sense? That's why I'm with Kamala. I've known her for 2 decades. She's practical, and she gets stuff done.
As president, I will chart a new way forward and find solutions to create jobs and bring down costs. I will fight for you and your family every day.
Pennsylvania, let's not go back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Vice President Harris and former President Trump are in a tight race for Georgia's vote, with Trump holding a 1-point lead in the latest polling, well within the margin of error.
Georgia has one of the highest maternal mortality rates of any state, according to the Center for Reproductive Rights. And nationally, Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy complications than white women.
NBC's Tremaine Lee sat down with a rarely heard from group of voters in Atlanta, black men voting for the lives of black women. And Tremaine joins us now. Tremaine, good morning. What did these men tell you?
Jose, maternal mortality and reproductive justice aren't typically issues we, consider as men's issues, black men's issues in particular. But I sat down with a group of black men, among them 2 who lost their wives during childbirth due to complications, who are urging other black men to get off the sidelines and vote as if the women in their lives, their mothers, sisters, daughters, and partners' lives are at stake.
For me, it's very simple, right? As someone that's been, drastically impacted and devastated through the loss of my wife, through maternal mortality, it's very clear. Vice President Harris is the one that ideally aligns with, the person that I feel like will have the most compassion, empathy towards my family and everything that we experience.
I'm thinking about my daughter, my friends, my cousins that this affects. Just thinking about the abortion laws that they want to put into place. Is kind of like if you have embryos, are they considered, viable or living, and can you discard them, or what do you have to do? You have to constantly pay for them being frozen. So it's just, I think the Harris administration will align more with my views.
The election is just days away. What role did maternal health play in your decision?
Oh, it played a major role. It was, I already knew I was voting for Harris, but it made it almost poetic that the person that she is running against, has done everything to try and whip up his conservative base. And one of the ways that he has done that is through these draconian abortion laws that he has supported.
I think that bottom line, Vice President Harris' track record around maternal health and specifically naming black maternal health as a priority for this administration is unquestionable. I think in 2021, there were less than 10 states that had expanded postpartum care for mothers to a year postpartum. Now we have, I think, 46 as of January of this year. That's true change. And so you can't question it. With that being said, I have yet to hear anything from the Trump administration or his policy when it comes to making an impact on the maternal health crisis, and particularly the black maternal health crisis.
I wonder for each of you, what is at stake?
My wife's life. She's pregnant right now. Republicans here in Georgia have been more concerned about whether or not my wife goes and gets an abortion, or if a miscarriage that we've had could potentially have been done in a way that was insidious, than they have been about protecting my wife who wants to be a mom. Mm-hmm. There are many black women who want to be mothers.
I never missed a prenatal visit for either of my sons. My wife never missed a prenatal vitamin, right? I went to the Lamaze classes. I held her hand, right? I looked the doctors in the eyes. I let them know that she had a husband that was here and was willing to die for her. And none of that was enough. None of that was enough to make sure that my wife walked out of that hospital to raise her sons. And so for me, although there's nothing I can do to bring Kira back, the highest honor we can pay her, the highest honor that we can pay Yolanda, the highest honor that we can pay every single mother that's made the ultimate sacrifice, giving the gift of life, is to make sure we do everything we can, which includes electing people that prioritize maternal health and aren't ashamed to say black maternal health.
Jose, this group of men have coalesced around an organization called Sister Song here in Atlanta, which is a reproductive justice organization. And their message is dovetailing the closing argument from VP Kamala Harris and high-level surrogates like Michelle Obama that black men should vote. Men should vote in honor of their women in their lives. And they should protect, especially black men, protecting black women, Jose.
Tremaine Lee, what a powerful and in so many ways important conversation. I thank you.
And joining us now, W. Kamau Bell, TV host and author of Do the Work, an anti-racist activity book. And still with us, Simone Sanders Townsend. Kamau, so nice to see you again, my friend. What's your reaction to what we heard from these men about the role that women's health is playing in their vote?
Well, since my hair is all gray, I've officially entered my unk era, so I'm proud of those brothers. I'm proud of them, and if I was Kamala Harris, I would take them on the road with me because I think a lot of times the talk around black men voting is that it feels like it's responsibility politics or shaming, and those brothers are speaking from their heart, and that is way more powerful than anything even Barack Obama could say or Kamala Harris could say, because they are real men speaking from their heart. So I feel very charged up and proud of them.
Yeah, I mean, Simone, this is something that we rarely hear, and it's not anyone's fault, I guess, but that Tremaine was able to sit down and it seemed like such a private conversation, right? And yet with such massive significance. What does something like this, how much of an impact will something like this conversation have on the national discourse?
Yeah, I think it's a huge impact, right? I think that when we talk about the impact of the Dobbs decision, how Democrats writ large nationally have talked about it since the Dobbs decision has been the focus on just women. And I feel like now we're talking more nationally about the gender gap and how men are a part of this conversation. But when you drill down into communities, men have always been a part of this conversation. Those men that were in this focus group with Tremaine in Georgia, they are the physical not even just a physical representation. They lived the harrowing stories that Mrs. Obama talked about in her remarks in Kalamazoo with the vice president just last week. And this is real for voters all across the country. It's why I fundamentally believe that actually the impact of Dobbs, we actually are not seeing it reflected in the data, because this is the first presidential post-Dobbs. It's not a theoretical conversation for these men in Georgia or men in Texas or men in Arizona, men in South Carolina, men in North Carolina. This is real. Women are bleeding out. Women are dying from sepsis. Men are coming home from the hospital without their families. And I feel like when we put it in such real terms, then it becomes more of an accessible conversation for folks. I'm really grateful for Tremaine for bringing the conversation to the forefront.
Kamau, I'm curious how you are looking at the closing arguments we're seeing from both candidates, frankly, especially as they are courting some of these key constituencies, these voters of color, black voters, Latino voters. Are their messages landing with the voters who need to hear them?
I mean, I would. Tuesday will tell. I don't think everybody is looking at this from a million different angles. We are not sitting around watching the same news channels anymore. We have Joe Rogan, who somehow thinks he's Walter Cronkite, which is weird. So I think we have to understand that everybody's looking at this differently. We have a huge percentage of the country who, no matter what Donald Trump does or says, they are voting for him. That is their guy. And then we have people on the left who are often voting for reasons that are individual and very powerful to them. And so I think you have to wait until you get in that voting booth to decide. I think I'm telling everybody it's going to be, act like it's going to be close and act like your vote makes the difference.
Simone, on yesterday, J.D. Vance went on Joe Rogan's past podcast and was asked about abortion. Here's part of what he had to say.
This is not true of the gross majority of our pro-choice citizens, but you do sometimes see people they'll go on TikTok and they'll celebrate having an abortion.
Yeah.
I've known many, many women, usually when I was younger, who chose to have abortions because they felt like they didn't have any other options. And I don't judge them. I think that a lot of them just felt like they were completely trapped, and they made the decision that was ultimately right for them. Again, my argument is we need to try to gain those women's trust back, because clearly the Republican Party on this issue has lost a lot of trust, but none of them were baking birthday cakes and posting about it afterwards.
Simone, just what's your reaction to that?
Well, you know what? Joe Rogan did push back, so
right.
I'm glad for Joe Rogan.
He said people aren't celebrating.
Yeah,
he said that's a little extreme.
It's very extreme. Look, I think the problem is that J.D. Vance talks about earning women's trust back, and that the Republican Party apparatus has to do that, and Republican elected officials. The issue with the ability to earn women's trust back is, no, Republicans did not run on jailing women, jailing doctors, fining women, fining doctors, making women bleed out in parking lots, right? Making 10-year-olds have the babies of their rapists. But that is exactly what is happening in many places across this country. Literally, every state in the South except for Virginia, if you go into a hospital and you're pregnant and you have an emergency, they are first going to say, I can't do anything for you because you are pregnant. They're going to say, I need to call the lawyer, not let me give you the health care that you need. And so, again, it's not a theoretical conversation anymore. So J.D. Vance, the Republican Party apparatus, hasn't done anything about the realities that women are dealing with in this country, across the country. They haven't. And the unresponsiveness to the reality of the situation, I think, is the consequence that people will meet at the ballot box. More than 3.5 million people have already voted in Georgia. More than 873,000 black voters specifically, like those black men in Georgia that Tremaine Lee talked to. These are record numbers, and it's going to make a difference.
Kamau, your thoughts on what we heard from Vance?
First of all, I've been trying to avoid J.D. Vance content, so now I got a migraine. Thanks for that, MSNBC. I would say this. Joe Rogan isn't sure we landed on the moon, and yet felt like he had to push back against J.D. Vance. That tells you a lot about where J.D. Vance and his political policies lie. That even the guy who's always high on weed, who's not sure we landed on the moon, was like, wait a minute, J.D. Vance, I think you're talking crazy.
The organization American Bridge 21st Century has launched a 6-figure ad campaign focusing on Puerto Rican voters in the blue wall swing states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And joining us now, senior advisor for that organization, James Carville. He's also co-host of the Politics War Room podcast. Also with us, the group's co-founder, Bradley Baychuk. Joe, you have the first question.
Hey, James, you probably heard our conversation talking about how the false sort of the sticking their chest out on the Trump campaign. We've been talking about how we think it's a tie. I'm curious, how are you looking at this race with about 5 days to go?
Well, both Brett and I, degenerate gamblers, said I would say take Harris over 270 electoral votes. Let these fools in these crypto markets do something. Let them drive the betting line into a favorable place and then take advantage of it. That's what I would do. I think she's going to win.
And why do you think she's going to win?
He's got more money, got more energy, has a more united party, has better surrogates, and he's stone-ass nuts. Okay, when you start talking about lining up a political opponent with 9 people in a firing squad, and then you have the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times says, "Ooh, I don't want to get involved in this. This is dirty politics." I mean, Joe, it's unbelievable. Come on, you and I have been around the world once in Arkansas twice. We've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, you know, James, you and I, we were on opposite sides a lot of our political career. We certainly in the 90s, whatever, the 2000s. I remember, several times, Bill Clinton, you could impeach him on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday, he'd invite you over and be talking about what bill we needed to pass the next day. I had one law partner who saw Bill Clinton sign something for me after we had done long-term care and said, "Dear Joe, thanks for everything." And my partner said, "Thanks for everything? What? You impeached him? What are you?" But that was a different time when Democrats and Republicans fought like hell, but they worked together for the betterment of America. And yet, on our screen right now, I'm showing you Donald Trump. This isn't even a Democratic-Republican battle. This is Donald Trump talking about executing one of the most conservative Republicans in Congress over the past decade.
Well, I can't wait to watch the cameras chase Lindsey Graham around the mall, see how fast he's going to run to get away from him.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think there are going to be a lot of people that, again, will say, "Oh, I didn't hear it. I didn't hear it. He didn't say it. Oh, well, he didn't mean it." Bradley, let's turn to what we led in with, and that is your group's push to get the message out to Puerto Rican voters in the blue wall states about what Donald Trump and those at Madison Square Garden thought and think of Puerto Ricans.
Yeah, I think this goes to what you were talking about earlier, which is that some of these voters are sort of numb to these crazy things that Trump says. But when you look at him making a threat of overturning Roe v. Wade, he made good on that threat. When they talk about Puerto Rico being garbage, when they talk about Liz Cheney, when they talk about overturning, retracting and banning the ACA, taking away health care. I mean, these are all issues when they talk about whether women not like it or not. They're straight from the horse's mouth. There's still 3 to 4% of swing voters in these states that are persuadable, and we're reaching them straight in their inboxes, in their texts. They're over-indexed online. And I think this is what it really comes down to. You have to let them see Trump in his own words, let them see the threat. And if this is how you want to close a campaign on this closing message, this would not be on a bingo card of a successful winning campaign.
So, Bradley, so many campaigns every 4 years are settled because of the economy. And obviously, as we've been discussing this morning, there are a lot of important issues on voters' minds right now. But for many, it is going to be those pocketbook items that matter the most. You know, we have seen, at times the Biden administration struggle to get credit for the job it's done steering the economy. What is the closing argument that the Harris team, she, of course, part of that Biden administration, can make here in these couple days for those voters who still haven't made up their minds and are thinking about their wallets?
Yeah, I think, number one, you're seeing that this economy has been roaring, and that we may not, I think people will start to feel that. Number two, reproductive freedom is an economic issue. You just heard a powerful story from Avery. When you talk about abortion, democracy, and freedom for a lot of these voters, you talk about child care, you talk about paid family leave. I mean, I don't think we should all be surprised that women are showing up in droves to vote for Harris. I agree with Donnie. They're going to save democracy. But child care, reproductive freedom, paid family leave, these are economic issues. And women are the dominant force in our politics right now, and we shouldn't forget it. Joe said this earlier. This is an election where it's bros versus Roe. And if you want to bet on the bros, which Trump is doing, it's a risky bet. You've not seen it win before.
All right, James, I'm curious. I know you think she's going to win, but in these final days, what would you like to see her doing?
I mean, she's got to go to the places that she's going, and she has to draw a very sharp distinction, which I think is going to be easy to do, because the events at Madison Square Garden, followed up by assassinating firing squad for my political opponents, it's just some pretty potent stuff. And Mika, let me tell you, he's going to find out, and Alito's going to find out, you've just agitated an entire hornet's nest of American women, and they're coming out. And if you look at these early vote numbers, or you look at anything, the women of this country are just tired of being treated like they're being treated by Trump and Alito and the Supreme Court, and they're gonna tell people they don't like it. I promise you. And that piece that you did is like critically important for people to see.
Democratic strategist James Carville and co-founder of American Bridge 21st Century, Bradley Baychok and James Carville, thank you both very much for being on this morning.